Well, I know you'll be greatly disappointed that I'm not going to talk about scars. You're probably even more disappointed that I'm not going to talk about wine, although I could persuade you. But I thought I would pick a few separate, disparate, really big topics rather than talk about my own minutia that I work on. And this all started off with breakfast this morning. I was sitting there in the restaurant, and they had that incessant TV babbling away in the corner. And I tried really hard to ignore it because I just wanted to eat my little bowl of granola and get on with life. But that person just kept yapping away, and if I summarized it, the world's going to hell, the stock markets are crashing, Glencore lost 30% of its entire capitalization, and mineral resource prices are in the toilet bowl, and there's just no hope for the future. Okay, it's a good day. So, we all know that we're in a boom and bust business. So let me give you a little perspective on that. And this is really aimed at the young people, the students in the audience. Basically anybody younger than Ross Lorch. That's my So here are the fundamental drivers, the reality that make our world tick. And I could do this for any element of the periodic table. I just happen to pick copper, it's pretty common. And there's three curves on there. And probably most of the people in the room know this already, but it bears repeating. Okay, the green line is world population growth over the last 100 years or so. Okay, and there is no sign that it's going to stop growing. In fact, throughout the first controversy of life, we have a real problem in this world because all of our economic models, all of our main world religions are based upon the assumption of continued growth. Okay, and many people throughout many centuries have looked at that as a mathematical impossibility. I'm not going to go there today. I'm just going to point out that curve shows no sign of slowing down. Okay? And even if it were to start to plateau, we're still dealing with billions more people than we have now. Okay? The bottom red curve is a simple illustration of the fact that we're all consuming now more per person than we ever had before in history. We like to think of this as standard of living, and most people regard this as a good thing. Very few people volunteer for, yes, please reduce my standard of living. That's what I really like to do. Okay? And when you take those two together, more people consuming more stuff, it's a highly technical talk, you end up with a blue curve, which notice has a pretty steep slope. And that is the consumption or production of that commodity. Okay? So that is the fundamental driver. All the boom and bust that go on, and it's roughly a 7 to 10 year cycle, give or take a few decades. That we all lived through boom times, we've all lived through bust times. If you haven't yet, all I can guarantee you is that you will. It's coming. But these fundamentals are not going to change. So at that level, I'm extremely optimistic about our future and our business because our jobs are to find the mineral resources that civilization needs. One of the mantras in my current job, which I've only done for the last couple of years, I was brought in the USGS to reinvigorate, to do something wonderful with the Mineral Resources Program. And the first thing I countered is that very few people, including the United States Congress, the President of the United States, the Director of the USGS, I should probably stop right there, none of them fully understand how essential mineral resources are to everything we do. And so I start off every briefing I do. I do a lot of testimony for Congress, a lot of work with the executive branch in the White House. Is my mantra that mineral resources are building blocks of civilization. Okay? We need them, we can talk about different ways of achieving that, but it's something we simply have to have. Beyond that, they're changing in terms of how necessary or how people perceive them as necessary. And this is a really nice little slide to illustrate that. You've got the shoebox size phone on one side, and the smartphone almost everybody in this room has in their pocket. And what's shown here is simply the elements from the periodic table that were essential for those two technologies at different points in time. And the simple message is quite clear, that the modern telephone uses many more elements. None of them at a huge amount, but they are critical, they are necessary for much of what we do. I can do the same thing for computers, for televisions, and do the same story. So let's just think about what that means. This is a wonderful little factoid that I like to use in the bar. People ask me what they do, and I say, oh, you're going to regret asking that question. So, here it is. China, in the last 3 years has used more concrete than the United States did in the previous 100 years. Let me just repeat that in case you're a little slow on the uptake. In 30 years, China has used more concrete than the United States has in 100 years. This is building the entire interstate freeway system, the entire cities of Los Angeles and Houston, and we have a few older cities that are largely built, most of the infrastructure in the United States. All of that was surpassed in 3 years. This is a way of thinking about that little blue curve that's going really steeply. But since the picture tells more than 1,000 words, let me illustrate this even more graphically. This is Shanghai in 1987. This is Shanghai from the exact same point of view in 2013. Okay, for those of you who are a little slower, you can adjust your bifocals. There it was, 1987. And there it is, not even now, 2013. Okay, this is part of what's driving all this and why everybody in this room is so essential for the future of civilization. My title might have seemed slightly excessive when we first read it, but I think it's actually very accurate. What we do is essential for the future of civilization. Okay, this comes to the fore when we have little things like this, and it's not that earth elements are particularly important, but they got people's attention, and in my job they're really, really useful. Because when I walk into a congressional office to do a briefing, and I say, I'm here to talk about the glories of mineral resources, you can see the eyes start to glaze over, and it goes like this. But if I say, I'm here to talk about rare earth elements and critical materials, they go, oh, my boss is going to build on that. And then I say, great, let's talk about it. Do you have any clue what's in it? No, not exactly. Great, we're here to talk about it. So this is kind of summarized by this concept of criticality and critical minerals. In previous decades, it was strategic minerals. None of the terminology is terribly important. What it does is it allows people to visualize in a way that they can't for most other things, that some things really are important. And perhaps for legislation, political leaders, and maybe even geologists, oh, worthy though they are, need to play in this picture. The other thing I would say is critical is information. And that's going to segue in the rest of my talk. The information that we provide, and here is a shameless self-promotion, this is the United States Geological Survey. We provide the world's best information on this stuff everywhere. The United Nations, the European Union, the World Bank, they all rely upon the numbers that we produce, which is basically just summarizing the stuff that you know day to day, is what we all explore. So I'm going to segue into the more academic part of information, not this sort of commodity stuff, and talk about the scientific publication process. Both, again, for the younger people in the audience who may not have published their first scientific paper yet, but I trust everybody in this room will, before you leave this room, think about what paper you're going to publish and submit to a high-quality journal. Not that I can think of any. And let's go back in history and think about how this process works. It'll be instructive for everybody. So the world's first scientific publication, probably nominated a few of them, is the Philosophical Transactions, the Royal Society of London, in 1665. And this is quite an achievement. If we look back now, we might think a little bit differently about what science was. But it didn't really undergo peer review. Basically, people just had their friends, they published it. So peer review developed about a century ago. It was gradually evolved from that. One of the reasons why there wasn't much peer review before is that there really weren't that many papers. They really have to sort among them. Okay, now there are more and more papers, and the amount published is doubling every 15 years. And the number of papers published every year is mind-boggling. It's in the millions. Luckily, they don't all come to me, because it feels like at times that they do. Every morning when I wake up, I go through a little ritual. I turn on my computer, and there's the list of new manuscripts that have come in since I made the mistake of going to bed last night. This is why I try not to go to bed at night, because I don't have this problem in the morning. So here's how the process works. The author, the most important person in the universe for me, writes a wonderful message that is very clear in their head. I'm not going to go too far into the message of what's in their head and what actually came out. That then submits to the editors. That's where I first started dealing with it. And I look at every single manuscript that comes in. Not to read it completely in detail. I'm not doing a personal review of it, but to make the initial decision. Is this ultimately publishable? And if so, who's the appropriate associate editor to handle it? So for the Journal of Economic Geology, before that, I was editor of Meinert, so I can speak for simply broadly across our scientific discipline. We have 25 associate editors scattered around the world, different expertise, different areas, different methodologies. So I try to identify who would be the best person to handle that. And then they are responsible for identifying experts to review it. And this is something that's a mystery to a lot of people. There's really only a handful of experts out there. Most of the manuscripts are go to the same people. If you're writing something on a sedimentary basis, guess what? Murray Hicksman's going to see your paper. And in the old days, they had a huge problem. People submitting manuscripts to multiple journals at the same time. And then they would go to the same person for review. And you would get them both and you go, oh, what's wrong with this picture? That I think we've more or less got rid of. The reviewers write the reviews. That then goes back to the associate editor who summarizes that and makes the first decision point. Summarizes, is this ultimately on the path to publication or not? One of the things I do very stringently, I use the word draconian for me, I like to think of it as pleasant and suave, both mean the same thing, is to think about whether this can go forward ultimately in publication. Because if not, I don't want to waste the viewer's time or the editorial board's time. And so that's when you get the very polite letter from you saying, thank you very much. You might consider different things like flipping burgers and other stuff. Then it goes back to the author with a very nice short little list of these sort of things that need attention. These are not suggestions. Okay? These then get worked on, they come back, and go through that process until the paper is finally where it wants to be. In terms of economic geology, we get about 200 new manuscripts a year. It varies a bit. I think we've gotten close to 300 a couple times. The total traffic, as manuscripts go back and forth several times, is at least 400 manuscripts a year, which is why there's almost never a day that goes by that I don't have manuscripts coming in. And economic geology, blessed though it be, compared to other fields, economic gets about 500, nature gets about 9,000 submissions a year. So obviously all those things build up. So what is a review? Many authors like to see a review that's nice and short and says, good job. Now, as editors, we have a different take on that. We call that a non-review, because it didn't really assess the points. And it's not that a review only does negative things. It will also praise the things that are done well. But the purpose of a review is to identify the things that need attention. The reviewer is your best friend all the way along this process. You want people to pick things that need more attention, because none of us can write just boom out of our head something that's beautiful, except maybe Ross Lawrence. But for the rest of us, we need multiple cycles of review to get through this. Okay, so here it is, the top 10 list, 10, of things that make it more likely to get published or not. Okay, the first one, and this may sound, how many cups of coffee it took me to get that data point, and it's going in that paper. Okay, so I'm just telling you as the editor, it's not, it's going right back out. It needs to be in there for one reason only, that is, it helps you tell your story and provides the evidence for it. So really give some thought to what do I need to do, and if you want to err on what is the bare minimum I can do to tell the story and make people believe it. And then cut that in half. Organization. I feel like a grammar teacher in high school, first year of college. Organization is the key to telling a successful story. It may sound simple, but an idea needs to proceed logically from what is the problem, what was done, and what are the conclusions. I can't tell you how many papers you read through the whole thing before you figure out, oh, this is what they were talking about. So organization, a nice logical step through, is very, very important. And then here is the most important thing I'm going to say about the publication process and the whole talk, and that is critical review and revision are essential for a quality publication. Nobody, not even Ross Lawrence, I was joking before, disputes out a perfect paper. Just does not happen. Even the most accomplished authors, like Dick Sillitoe, I guarantee you, do not just write these wonderful papers. And Dick's probably a great example because he's written hundreds of papers, many more than I'll ever publish in my life. And they all are the result of multiple cycles of review. And none of us, we've got a lot of really top researchers and authors in this room, none of us would ever think of submitting a manuscript that we hadn't had critical review beforehand. So if this is your first paper, you need to make sure that's done. And if your supervisor, your advisor, isn't helping you, isn't insisting that you do that, one, fire him, get a new advisor. I guess that's probably not possible. And have a nice general discussion with him. He said, I really need this. Larry told me I'll never get this published unless somebody reviews this before we submit it. And so this is prior submission of the manuscript. The formal review is what comes comes after. You want to identify all those embarrassing little problems, like misspelling Meinert in the references. When I read an extra when it first comes in, and I read the first line of the abstract, and there's a spelling mistake. I'm not talking a little tiny one, you know, like the rocks is. Ooh, that's a pain in my heart that lasts for a long time. Probably longer than it's going to take me to read the rest of the abstract because I'm probably done right there. Do not do that. Okay, factors that decrease the likelihood of favorable reviews. Splitting a single, nice, integrated study into small parts and publishing each one separately in a different journal scattered all over the heavens. There's many phrases for this. Salami tactics, slicing things down to the minimum publishable unit. And I understand the pressures that lead to this. And they may be coming, again, for junior authors from your supervisor. For untenured faculty, they may be coming from your dean, from various review and promotion committees who are saying, we're going to count on those publications. But from the editor's point of view, you need everything to be able to support itself. And when things get sliced into small places so that the evidence in that paper can't stand on its own, you need to keep citing these other papers, that's a mistake. Do not do it. Another factor is describing large districts and belts before anybody, including you, have described the individual deposits. Okay, not to mention any specific countries by name like China, this is a very common phenomenon where you've got all these papers that get submitted describing this metallogenic belt, and they describe that there's all these different deposits, but none of those deposits have actually been described, not just in detail, but at all in the literature. So it's just impossible to evaluate. And then one final thing about what can be published and whatnot. We get a lot of papers because there's new analytical techniques that allow you to very quickly generate data. And so there'll be an age date, there'll be a pretty picture of a pyrite, not to pick on Ross too much. And there it is. Having those to support the central idea of the paper, no problem, but not the whole paper. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do before we drag me kicking and screaming off stage is to talk about the impact of publications. I'll talk about how we get there, why it's important in terms of safety and civilization. And there's been lots of people who have read about things like impact factors and other things that are supposed to measure quality. It's just one of the studies. But I'm going to take you through a little specific data compilation we did to illustrate a really painful problem we're having right now in the world literature. So this is my good friend Ross Large. You might pick on him, but this one, Ross complains to me almost daily, it might be even hourly, about the people he has to answer to. So the Australian Research Council has graded different journals, and you don't need to worry about the individual lines which are too short, but you all know what the grading scheme of life is. And so the A+ journals are the top ones, and the A and the B. And so all the middle resource journals go down there and B, which of course drives people to want to need to satisfy people who want these A+ journals. And I'm going to walk you through all the ones that are highlighted there and show you what's going on with the impact factors. So I picked 3 representative geology journals. A lot of this was compiled by Rich Goldfarb. So, Earth and Planetary Science Letters, which has, if you go back 10 years, a very solid impact factor of 4. Most mineral research journals are well below that, and it's been fairly steady over the years. Okay. And then 2 other journals, Lithos, which really most people consider quite the same. It's a good solid journal, and it's increased, it's basically doubled from 2 up to 4. So now it's tied basically with that. And then we've got Modern Research, which is a fantastic journal if you need to know about modern research. That went from appropriate impact factor of 1 up to a mind-boggling 8 over this 10-year period. Okay, and so we're going to explore why that is and what it means. Okay, so this is a simple graph. Those are the same 3 impact factor graphs, and the bottom that amount is remaining roughly stable about 5%. If you look at Lithos and Modern Research, they both gone from 5% to over 40% Chinese papers. Okay, this has an effect upon impact factors in terms of how they are calculated. It's well known that there is a policy of paying for the publication of papers in China, and that payment is also coordinated to the impact factors of the journal. So there's actually a self-incentive feedback loop here, and there's a very detailed publication in Science that analyzed that problem I've cited here. How does this compare to mineral resources journals? Okay, the three main journals in our field, Economic Geology, Meinert, or Geology Reviews. For Economic Geology, the impact factor has been fairly consistent over the past 5 years to 2.5, and the number of papers from China is about 7% on average. And again, this has nothing to do with the individual quality of papers from China. I'm more than happy to have great papers from anywhere on the planet. Mineral deposit over the same time period has had similar impact factors to the percentage of papers from China has gone from 10 to 30%, and Geology Reviews has seen its impact factor skyrocket to 3.56, the highest ever achieved by
не говорит о нем.
and the number of Chinese papers is now over 50%. Okay, and many of those manuscripts I saw originally for Economic Geology. You can put the dots after that one. So the question is, does this rapid impact factor increase correspond to real world use by the global research community? We're all saying, yes, indeed, these are the best papers in the world, or does it really reflect the citation problem that I'm alluding to? Okay, so I'm glad you asked that question. Okay, so here are the top 7 papers published. No geo. And I'm not doing this to pick on another journal. I couldn't do this, and I did for the first part of this analysis with general geology journals. But this is our field. So this is personal. We really need to think about this. Okay, so the top 3 papers, okay, which were cited 41, 38, and 37 times. Okay, that means they have an impact factor of 41 for that paper. You don't need very many of these to have your impact factor for the whole journal go up. And if you look at those, that blue, those are all the citations to these papers were by other papers published in China. And part of this has to do with people being required to cite a research leader or supervisor or something else. And only one of those citations, red on top, was by somebody outside of China. And that was actually by the editor who was doing a summary of all papers published in the journal. Now, I'm not saying there aren't great papers published in OGR. There are. I've got some there myself. So there's nothing wrong with the journals. There's no reason why I can't publish good science there. But let's look at the 2 that don't have a huge number of Chinese things. And they are cited by people across the world, which is what you'd expect. We have great researchers spread globally across the globe. There's very few countries that don't have some, and many countries are blessed, like Codes, with having spectacular numbers of researchers. They are finding great papers and citing them. There's something going on here that's systematically distorting the system in terms of impact factors. And this is my very last one, and this is to look at the other side of this. So I mentioned that Economic Geology, the number of papers published is relatively small, relatively constant for China. But the downloads, so the downloads from the various websites, particularly the SHG, Geoscience World website, of papers. This is all the papers downloaded from Economic Geology at the same time period as comparing. The majority of them are from China. Okay, so there is worldwide impact, no pun intended, for papers from the journals, but the impact factors themselves are being gained by the system, such that I would argue not only are they not representative of anything approaching quality, they might be inversely proportional right now. Okay, so the conclusions. Impact factors are long recognized as flawed in general because of the short time frames, particularly inappropriate for geological journals. Our field work takes a lot longer, and that's why we're a different field of physical chemistry. And the recent increase, and this goes across fields, not just mineral resources, not just geology, it also applies to other fields as well, has led to a great inflation of impact factors, and I would argue is a confusion in 4 countries or research councils that are saying to Ross Large, you need to publish more, and journals with high impact factors. Ross, here's your ammunition, saying, no, I am perfect in every way.